Morning everybody, welcome back to another video. I want to talk about something today that I think I've talked about in my books, and a little bit at least, and it's something that came up in a conversation I was having the other day, and I wanted to clear up maybe some misconception people might have, and that is the idea that is accepted a lot by the so-called New Age community and many people, that we are here to learn something, we're here to learn a lesson, and that until we learn that lesson, we're going to be stuck within this reality. And that is versus the idea that we are here simply to experience what already is. My knowing is that we are here to experience what already is. We are not here to learn a lesson. We are not here to create anything, and I'll explain why here in a moment. It takes an understanding of time and how creation happened. I've talked about those things in my books because they're very important concepts to be able to understand everything. If you don't understand how time works and what time is, and you don't understand how creation was done, then you're going to have a very hard time accepting anything else about how reality actually exists and how our world is what it is. I'll start with the concept of creation, which is something I've talked about a few times. And that is the only thing that is real is nothing. I had an opportunity during one of my out-of-body type and a beyond out-of-body type experience, where when I was I went to the tunnel of light. I went there to see what was there, and I talk about what I experienced. I think it's my second book, We Are the Real Body Snatchers. Anyway, once I was there and I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish there, I suddenly found myself out of there, and to the point in which I had an instant understanding I was at the point of nothing. And nothing is all that is. Nothing to us means there's nothing, but in fact, nothing exists. There's just simply no... It exists without having to have an awareness of knowing of existing. It's I am without the I. And nothing is all that is real. Nothing decided to experience itself. I have a thought, what we call our universe. In order to do so, it had to create something besides itself, because if there's nothing that exists besides yourself, then you don't know that you exist, because you have nothing to compare yourself to. So nothing created source, which is light, energy, and vibration or frequency. It's where everything started. It's the world, that it's all that really is. And source at that moment divided itself to become what we considered galaxies, planets, suns, people, and everything in every role that could ever exist in this universe, to play out every possibility and every potentiality. And when I say that, it means that the we that we think we are, like here, like Ron was created at that moment, at the moment of creation. Every version of Ron, in other words, every decision, every choice that I think I'm making, and how those would play out, there is a version of Ron that is experiencing those. And at that singular moment in time, every one of those versions was created. And it's the same thing with all of us. It's not just me. And that's why I tell you that the concept about time is a creation. Time is a creation in order for us to have an experience. In order to have an experience, it has to have a beginning and an end. And that's why we created time. We have reality that we experience in what we determine to be a linear fashion. In other words, one scene after the other. In reality, every moment in space-time is an individual, independent moment in space-time, and they all occurred simultaneously. One of the examples that I use quite a bit is if you take a wedding, and you take a picture of this wedding every second, from the beginning of the wedding to the end of the wedding, and then you take all those photographs and you put them in an album from the beginning to the end. What you can do with those photos, because each of those photos in that album is an independent, individual moment in time, and really has no bearing on any of the others. You can take those photos and rearrange them in any order, any position that you want, and create any kind of an experience for the person going through that photo album. That is essentially what happened when every aspect of us was created, meaning that every version of Ron that could exist, no matter what decisions he would make, he already is existing out there. And what we're doing in this reality is we put those in a linear manner in order to have a certain experience, yet at the same time, all of those other versions, same as all those other photographs, no matter which one you take out and look at, every other photograph still exists. And it's the same with our lives and our reality. Every version of us exists. So what happens as we go through our linear manner, we are constantly switching realities. In other words, we're switching versions of ourselves based upon the decisions and choices we think we're making. As I've stated before, we are not creating anything. We are manifesting what already exists. You cannot create something that does not already exist, plain and simple. So the idea that when you say you're here to learn a lesson, say you have a problem, whatever, maybe say your family has a problem with anger. There is a version of you in which your total life is made up of anger, having anger problems all the time, you and your family. There's also a version of you in which that anger issue has been dealt with, so to speak, and is no longer there in your life. It's an underlying theme, something you don't have to deal with anymore because you've already dealt with it. And every version of you in between already exists. So the idea that you have to try to learn a lesson doesn't exist, because that lesson that you think you're learning, you already have a version of you that already has. So all you're doing is switching reality, switching versions of yourself in order to have a certain experience. And that experience was created at the moment of creation. And every moment was created at that singular moment in time. So as you go and you are simply experiencing that, my feeling has always been that we are experiencing that thought of nothing in what we consider to be a physical term, a physical reality, which is not a physical reality. But we're experiencing it with feelings and emotions. It's kind of the difference between reading a book on how to fix an engine and getting out and actually trying to fix an engine physically. That's kind of the difference between nothing, experiencing it as a thought, and us experiencing it in kind of in a reality type situation. Although all of those moments, although all those experiences happened simultaneously and they all exist. Think of the idea, and I talk a lot, not a lot, but I talk in some of my videos and books about the concept of healing. How does it actually happen? And the idea is people think it has to be in a linear progression. You have to have this, and this, A, B, C, D, and so on. In reality, the version of you, say you got a cut, the version of you that got a cut, the version of you to where that was bleeding, the version of you where the bleeding stopped, where the scab started, where the wound started to heal from the inside, and eventually the wound is gone. Each of those versions of you, each of those pictures and stages of that all exist simultaneously. So when you understand that and you're able to really grasp that as a knowing and not a belief, you can go from A to D to A to G if you wanted to. You, instead of having to go through the progression of the healing process, you can go from the time of the point of the injury to the point of healing, because they both exist. You don't have to go through it any more than you have to learn a lesson. When there are what doctors would consider to be miracle cures, in other words, somebody has a problem and overnight that problem has disappeared, and the next day they're fine, there's no trace of it. But what actually happened is, for a moment in time, they moved beyond the beliefs and the accepted default programming of this reality that says we have to do things in a linear manner. For that moment, they skipped those in-between stages because they don't have to follow them linear, and that version of them where they are healed already existed simultaneously. Some people would say, well, that's still a healing. Well, I don't see it that way, because it already existed. You didn't have to get to the point to where you're healed, because that point already exists. And it's the same with the idea of having to come here to learn a lesson. you've already learned the lesson. That version of you already exists. And there are some of us who have come here from what we would consider to be our future, even though past, present, and future are all at the same time and all that exists, that have gone through, before we came here, we didn't have actual lives here, as many people think that they have. We went to what would be considered source, the Akashic Records. And we went there and we looked at the different realities, different lives that existed in which whatever we wanted to take up on this world, in other words, whatever we wanted to work through on this world, the progression for us to change, the experience that we were determined to have here. We picked out those experiences, we in essence downloaded them, and we also downloaded the version of those where whatever the issues were, we went to the end. In other words, maybe we downloaded the issue where we got cut. We also downloaded the us version to where that cut was already healed and gone. And the reason that is so that we can move forward quicker in this reality instead of having to go through all the linear steps that most people think that they have to do. Thus, that's what they end up experiencing over time. And so the whole point of this is that you're not here to learn a lesson. If you think that you're here to have to learn something, and as much as you think you're here because you have to ascend, you have to do this step and that step in order to get out of here, you have trapped yourself within the default programming. You've already learned, you've already ascended, you're already there. When you start to understand and accept that, you can move through and skip some of those in-between stages, thus you're able to move on to whatever you want for your next adventure, so to speak. And no, we're not necessarily picking in, even though we are, but it's kind of like you go to a travel agent and you look at all the travel brochures and decide where you want to go. All those places already exist, and it's the same as any experience that we're going to have. It already exists. We're simply, when you understand and you're able to move through those processes without having to go through step-by-step default, you do get the option to choose what you're going to go do after that, what world, what experience, what you want to have. It's not an in-between life scenario where you're having to go work on problems, because in that scenario, they're telling you that your spirit, your aspect, they consider your soul, which is not, it's not the soul, but they're saying that you are still lacking in some way and you have to learn and experience something. You do not. You already have all those answers. So you are here. We're all here to have an experience. In other words, to experience what already is. We are not creating it. We don't have to learn anything. You don't have to do all that stuff in order to get out of this so-called matrix reality. I guess one thing I will touch on too, that when I talked about what reality is, and I've gone through that quite a bit in the books, that reality is, the only way I can describe it is almost a holographic simulation type. I had that experience as well, to where I was able to watch the reality around me become what it actually is. I was able to move inside and see that torsion field, which is us and which we are a part of, and it is us at the same time. I was able to see those lines of what you would call codes, even though they're not. They're just simply frequencies. And those frequencies are translated by our brain, which is our translator and our restrictor. I'm not going to get deep into that now. And that's what allows you to see what you consider to be the reality, only it's in a two-dimensional version. It's simply on a flat screen. And then as we move into that within our torsion field, as we move into that deeper, it now becomes what we translate as a three-dimensional reality. But in fact, three-dimensional reality does not exist. Everything is within that torsion field, and all reality is a projection upon that torsion field. That's why they talk about the idea that we are a part of the universe is us. Every part of the universe is in every part of us, every cell, so to speak. And that's true. That's the holographic concept. And again, some of these words may not be exactly what it is, but it's the only way we can describe it because of the words and the exposure that we've had to things that make sense to us. We have to explain things by the reality that we're in, what makes sense to us. So anyway, that's the idea. Is you are not here to learn a lesson. You've already have that lesson. A version of you already has done it. You're simply here to experience the experience of going through or jumping past those and getting out of here. Anyway, have a good day.